Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us. You know that we host these webinars weekly, and our goal is to really find those companies and follow those companies that everybody is interested in. But Thian, before I turn it over to you, I just want to talk a little bit about the markets themselves, because we can't dismiss what's going on out there. Obviously, there's a lot of pain. And what we're doing here at 180 Markets is really focusing on those companies that are stock specific and control their own destiny. And specifically, we're looking for the companies just like Invion with market caps, let's just say circa below $200 million, but that also have company making catalysts where if they get things right and things go as planned, they are still multi-baggers and real game changers. And I just want to give a little bit of an update, on how we're looking at markets before I turn it over to you, Thian. And Thian, obviously, from your time at Goldman, these are challenging times, but given your background and given Goldman's quarterly results today, which were pretty outstanding, and they made all their money in the trading business, that bodes well for you or for your guiding us here at Invion. So welcome back.
Thanks very much, Greg. Yeah, no, it has been really challenging times. I'm sure your clients are feeling a lot of pain. I guess at Invion we're a little bit more fortunate. And in my days at Goldman, I was in the special situations area, so that's where I learned that cash is king. And thankfully, we raised some capital last year, and we're have the, I guess, fortunate situation of being able to essentially continue our business in adding long-term value, as opposed to needing to react to where the specific markets are trying to sort of move us or chase us. And then that's certainly how we're looking at next steps with Invion. We're in a position to think, as we said in Goldman, being long-term greedy. So yeah.
Gotcha. Hey, Thian, I can't resist, and it's not related to Invion, but it's related to your Goldman times. But since we're here, I'm going to hit you on the spot with it. What would you be doing at Goldman right now in that special situations group? I mean, they are such talented traders. So many people have come out of there. What would the attitude and the mantra be internally at this point?
Well, I guess, it depends which group, but the group I was in was focused on special situations. And I think we'd been waiting for 20 years for a distress cycle where, you weren't just getting free or cheap credit, and things were just, asset prices continue to stay up. But we're in a situation now where you've got high inflation, you've got, sort of structural challenges, both in interest rates and fundamentally in unemployment sort of coming down, significant inflation. So the whole, there's going to be a lot of stressed areas and distressed areas. And this is essentially where you can often find really interesting investment opportunities. As Buffett says, when everyone's scared, you become greedy. When everyone's greedy, you become scared. So, I think this feels like we're coming into that time, and it has been very, very choppy waters for folks. But for investors that have an ability to think longer term and be able to weather the storm, I think it creates some interesting opportunities. And that's what we would have done on my desk at Goldman.
Right. And also to give you some feedback and to give everybody in the audience feedback. We speak to our investors obviously all the time. Our sense is that investors actually do have a lot of cash. It's very different environment than 08 and 09 where people were really maxed out. But at the same time, as you mentioned, people are worried about inflation. They haven't seen a cycle like this in probably 20 years, even though we have a 40-year high print. But that investors are just nervous and waiting, but they're not stressed per se, is from a balance sheet perspective. But enough with digression. Why don't you just tell Invion, tell us what's going on your way, specifically within the company?
Well, what's easier for you, Greg? I mean, we had would your clients prefer something that's we walk through a presentation, which or just have a bit of a dialogue back and forth on what's been happening?
I think if you're okay with it, do you have a presentation? Can you share?
I do. If I can share the presentation, that would be great.
Yeah, hang on one second. You should be able to now. And maybe not go through necessarily slide by slide, but just to give people an overview, because it is you do cover a large swath of areas.
Absolutely. And feel free to just guide me where you think your clients will find the
Right.
discussion helpful. But in a nutshell, I guess we're focused on a pretty large space of disease areas in terms of solving world's problems. Obviously, cancer has been our primary focus, and we expanded it over the last year or two on atherosclerosis, which is a core element of heart disease, which is still the #1 cause of death globally, as well as infectious diseases, which we have been living with the last couple of years on. So we have a very large addressable market, but we got to focus on where the largest sort of inflection points for value are. And our technology is what we call photosoft technology. PDT stands for Photodynamic Therapy, and that essentially combines light with the drug to create a treatment. And I'll walk through some of the science on the next slide.
Right.
But we're not working in isolation. We're working together with world-class institutes like Hudson Institute and Peter MacCallum Cancer Center. And we're continuing to explore expanding relationships with other institutes as well. In terms of what we're the actual technology we have, we've actually demonstrated a number of things on a preclinical level. One is we can treat multiple types of cancers, and that's quite a divergence from a lot of sort of medical treatment sort of modalities that are out there. And it's not just killing the tumor or regressing the tumor, but we've actually also shown that we can trigger the immune response. So the body's own immune system starts recognizing the cancers and actually starts fighting it. And more recently, we actually had a announcement about our ability for our technology to enhance existing therapies, which I think probably the market didn't fully appreciate, because the stock price went down when we actually thought it was a really positive event. But I'll talk about that a little bit later as well.
Yeah, I think that's critical because, as you said, if the market has a different reaction than what you think it should have been, I'd love to discuss that a little bit further, if you don't mind.
Absolutely, absolutely, and then please nudge me if I walk past that and don't really cover it in enough detail.
Got it.
And the other point is that as we get closer to the clinical trials stage, one thing to bear in mind is that we've demonstrated that our technology has got a pretty strong therapeutic profile. So that the difference between how much dosage you can take and still be non-toxic versus what you actually need to actually treat and be therapeutic is 100 times. So that bodes well, because what you don't want is a drug that actually makes people sick as well. Yeah. And I guess the other aspect is we're actually a licensee of a technology. And 2 years ago, we were literally only had Australia and New Zealand as our markets. The quid pro quo there was RMW Cho, which is actually the group that owns the technology, actually funded everything. And they continue to fund much all the cancer development in Australia. And what we did in the last year was actually expand our territories to most parts of Asia Pacific and in cancer. And on top of that, we also created and acquired new disease areas licenses. And that was actually part of the reason for the capital raise last year, was actually to acquire these. We started getting really interesting results on some of our in vitro and in vivo work, really promising results. And before the price went too high, we thought we'd just acquire and make sure that we have a good addressable territory. And
right,
so,
because, sorry to interrupt, but because Australia has circa 25 million people, I assume that, I don't know precisely which territories you have in Asia Pac, but I assume it could be a multiple of 25 million.
Yeah, it's about it's about a half the world's population, I think we've got now, because it's
There you go.
Yeah, we haven't got China yet, but we've got India, Japan, Korea, and Oceania. It's actually a very, very large addressable territory. And I think that gives us an opportunity to capture the upside, versus just being a group that doesn't have any risk, but has a capped upside. Australia has incredibly good is an incredibly good environment for medical research, but as a global sort of market, it's really small.
Right. Fair enough.
And so what we're looking to do over the coming year is start our clinical trials, and I think that'll be a pretty important inflection point. We were hoping we'd start a little bit earlier, but as things happen with the environment we're living in, delays have occurred. But that said, I think we have we're planning in the coming year to actually start more than one clinical trial, and a lot of that cost, in fact, most of those costs related to cancer, will be covered by RMW. So from a cash burn perspective for Invion, we have actually very limited cash burn until we're well into our clinical trials, because we're not paying for them per se. And we get essentially into foreign markets that are outside Australia, that we really have to start forking larger amounts. At that point, I would imagine that we'll de-risk the situation quite substantially.
Yeah, Thian, a couple of questions. A couple of questions. Sure. When you say within the coming year, you should start the trials, is that within the calendar 2022, or would you say, and I know that it's hard to estimate exactly, or would you say like in the next 12 months?
I would say within the next 12 months or so.
Okay.
That's how I think about the coming year.
Okay, good. And then also, when you said that the cash burn, can you just explain to us, from when in a clinical trial, which obviously could take some time, you said that the Cho group is funding it up front. If for you to say add your funds at some point, would you already have an indication of how the trials are coming about, how they're going?
Yeah. So our plan is to do most of our early stage trials in Australia.
Okay.
Those are essentially funded by the RMW Cho group. So we have some corporate costs that we have to basically fund ourselves, but that's pretty small. It's not even like 6 figures. It's less than that.
Okay. Oh, okay.
So very small cash burn. Now, where the cash burn will start increasing for us is number one, when we start doing preclinical and clinical trial work outside Australia for cancer. And so, for example, we've got Singapore as a territory, India as a territory, Indonesia, Japan. We can actually, actually Japan might be AID, it's not cancer, but we basically can, don't have to enter those new markets until we feel very confident of the clinical trial results in Australia.
Beautiful, okay.
So from a risk perspective, essentially moving to those markets can be much more of a path to registration, as opposed to let's do a clinical trial and see if this thing works.
Got it.
Yeah. So so that and the rules there for anything outside Australia, if it's preclinical, we pay 25%. Once you get to clinical trials, we pay 75%. So what that means is that preclinical, we actually have much lower risk because it's still being funded by RMW. But by the time we reach clinical trial stage, yes, it is our territory, and yes, we should pay for most of it. But by that time, we should have had a fair amount of data, clinical data.
That's what I was driving at. Yeah. And also, one question we're already getting is what type, and I'm not sure exactly, Gary, the question precisely, but what type of clinical trials will be done? I'm not precisely sure. Yeah.
Well, in terms of indications, we're looking at skin cancers, specifically basal cell carcinoma, which accounts for about 70% of the skin cancers that occur. And Australia being the world capital for skin cancer.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Yeah, unfortunately, it is a target we're looking at. The second target is more of an orphan disease, but a pretty nasty one, anogenital cancers. And we're working with Peter Mack on that. And so we're also going to be targeting other more established solid tumor type of cancers. We haven't finalized which ones we're doing, but we're certainly having discussions right now about which ones we're gonna essentially aim for. The key message here is that we're not a one-stop or one pony type of technology. We're looking to treat multiple cancer types. that should be a really interesting sort of stage. So we're coming to a very interesting stage of the company's evolution.
Right.
I think the other thing probably worth mentioning is the atherosclerosis infectious disease. It is a really large area. We are at a much earlier stage of discovery. So we still need to do a little bit of work on just making sure, proof of concepts, et cetera, et cetera. So that's kind of the long game. That's a long-term sort of opportunity whilst we're sort of getting into the clinic with cancer. Now, that's certainly going to be how we look at the world over the next, 1 or 2 years.
Right. And with the Peter Mac Institute, and for those of you that don't know, Peter Mac, a world-class institution, truly global. I think they were actually highlighted by Mike Milken, in fact, at the Milken conference earlier this year. But Thian, one of the questions that's coming in is, with Invion, which type of cancer are you treating? Is it ovarian?
It's actually anogenital cancer,
Okay.
and there's a number of different types of anogenital cancers. The first stage Peter Mac are working on with us is some in vitro and in vivo work.
Okay.
Type of cancer called squamous cell carcinoma, and that's the type of cancer that's in the anogenital. There's also the same type of cancer that you find in about 25% of skin cancers, and the objective working Peter Mac is they are world-class, and I think they're running about 500 clinical trials just in cancer right now. So they know that space. One of the unique aspects is that under one roof, you've got a whole bunch of clinicians as well as researchers. And so there's a lot of discussions and sort of synergies by doing that. Obviously, I hope with Peter Mac, it's not just to focus on a isolated orphan indication, but also to open the doors. So if our technology is demonstrated to have really interesting efficacy and et cetera, Peter Mac certainly has the resources to open a lot more doors and a lot more indications. So
I'd say so, for sure.
They're a great partner, yeah.
A few people may know Invion, but a lot more know Peter Mac. No offense.
Absolutely.
Okay. Okay. Keep going.
Okay. So one other element is, and we were going to go through the checkpoint inhibitor work, but that actually opens up another avenue of commercialization. Of course, we're going to continue to develop our technology as a monotherapy and to make sure that we can demonstrate efficacy, ultimately go to a path to registration for our technology. But we're also quite keen and quite open to collaborate with industry, whether it's with checkpoint inhibitors, and let me leave that conversation to a little bit later, but also other collaborations where we might be able to potentially have combination therapies with our technology. And again, I can walk through 1 or 2 possible sort of pathways on that. So that kind of in a nutshell is where we're at. And I wonder if it's worthwhile just even taking a step back and even going through what a technology is. I'm not sure.
That would be great.
Yeah, and so our technology is called Photodynamic Therapy, and we're a next generation version of it. And what it has is essentially, it has essentially 3 steps. You've got a drug that basically localizes, and ideally localizes where the tumors are, and ideally doesn't stay in healthy tissue. And then when you shine a certain frequency of light, there's this oxidative process, a generation of what's called reactive oxygen species, and that is cytotoxic, basically kills cells wherever it's localized. Obviously, if you're localized in cancer cells, it kills the cancer cells. If it's localized in healthy cells, it kills the cells you don't want to kill, and therefore you get a lot of off-target effects. Right. And that was one of the real problems with the earlier versions of the technology, which we believe we've actually overcome and demonstrated certainly in some preclinical work we've done. And what it also does, and there's some interesting work we did previously, that it triggers the immune response as well. So your body starts recognizing the cancer and starts fighting it. And so that's essentially, in a nutshell, what our technology is. And through a bunch of work, particularly stuff that we've done with the Hudson Institute, we found that our photosensitizer or our drug essentially gets very selectively absorbed by cancer cells and not healthy tissue, which is really important. We've actually demonstrated in vivo regression in multiple cancer types. So it's not just a one-shot pony.
And those were the results kind of like about a year ago.
Yeah. So I guess a little bit of history on where we're at. We were going to actually start clinical trials much earlier in skin cancer using an earlier version of our technology. The little thing called COVID-19 hit, and we actually couldn't do trials that easily. So we went back and actually developed new compounds, and we actually have a lot of new compounds. But we decided to select INV-043 as our new compound. And we found that it was 50 times more potent than our previous version. And so we've been working on that. And we announced that, I think, end of first quarter last year. So we haven't had that much time to basically build on it.
Right.
But since then, we've used that and found that it's worked on multiple types of cancer. And also it has regressed a pretty nasty type of cancer called triple negative breast cancer. And it should even triggered an immune response. Right. We've used the same drug and tried to look at combinations and synergies with checkpoint inhibitors and found that it improved the effectiveness by more than 60%. We've found it to be non-toxic and safe, and certainly the work we've done today. And that bodes quite nicely for our path towards clinical trials, which, again, as I mentioned, we're looking to start over the coming year or so.
Great.
Yeah. Did you have any questions on that side?
The only thing I just want to highlight, and for everybody, is your technology. It's actually it's almost like an older technology that Invion has enhanced. Is that right? As opposed to brand new technology, the photosensor.
I mean, it's an older modality, which is a way to treat, which is you put a compound, and then you shine light and it kills wherever it's localized.
Right.
But our technology is quite different from the technology that was already out there. Last 20, 30 years. But we do benchmark against that, and that's what found it to be about 600 times more potent than a FDA approved version of a PDT drug that got approved decades ago. And also a lot more selective.
Gotcha.
Yeah. We've talked about Hudson and Peter Max.
Yeah,
no need to go through that. And really, in terms of the findings, as I mentioned, we've found it effective against multiple cancer types, potent, selective. It's got a really good therapeutic profile. Literally, we've tried it at 100 times the therapeutic dose, and we didn't notice any toxicity issues. Just one thing to bear in mind is when we injected in vivo, we found that within hours, it's already accumulated in the tumor. And then within a day, we couldn't find it in healthy tissue. It's essentially cleared from healthy tissue.
Right.
In the tumor, it stays there for at least 3 days. So that's a really nice profile where you can make sure that it's cleared from the healthy tissue. It only resides in the tumor.
Right.
And you've got a couple of extra days to sort of figure out when you want to sort of make the treatment.
Right. And it's these kinds of results that you're getting, or it's obviously like incredibly early days, but are these the results that give you the encouragement to keep pushing forward, Thian?
Oh, absolutely, Greg. That is the that gives us a lot of optimism about where we're going to be going next.
Right.
Actually, you can see it. I mean, in this picture on the right hand side, you've got this tumor here, and those pink spots are essentially where the photosensitizer has localized. And how do we know that? Well, there's actually two light wavelengths of light that activate this this compound. One is a blue light. And when you put a blue light, it fluoresces. And that's what you're seeing, those pinks. Even the little spots there are metastatic spots. And you've got these little pink spots that you can see. When you change the frequency to a red light spectrum, then that's when it generates that reactive oxygen species. That's when it actually kills the cells. So if you look at the possible applications, you can firstly find where the tumor is, and for example, a lot of surgeons who've got great skills, it's really hard to see which is tumor and which is healthy cells. So in a lot of surgeries in cancer, about 30% of the tumor is missed, and about 30% of the stuff cut out is healthy tissue. This
Okay.
can potentially help improve that hit rate.
Yeah, that's
If we work together with surgeons, for example, as well as be also a therapeutic where you just turn it into a red light, and you can regress those tumors, which we've already demonstrated as well. So that's not only just the types of cancers we address, but also different sort of ways. So we can either be a diagnostic, we can either be a therapeutic, or a combination of both, which is what we call theragnostic.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't think there's any point going through too much of this details. You can.
Yeah, no, that's okay. I also want to save some time for Q&A, so for sure.
Yeah, exactly. This is probably something worth spending a little bit of time on.
Yeah.
Is the triple negative breast cancer is a pretty nasty disease where it's often chemo resistant and metastasizes typically. And we did a mouse model where we actually treated the mice with that had triple negative breast cancer implanted. This is actually what happened. We had 3 control groups and 1 treated group. The control group actually, the tumor just kept getting bigger and bigger, and the treated group actually reversed. I mean, basically the lesion just went away.
Right.
And we didn't find evidence of metastases elsewhere. And even more interestingly enough, we tried to re-implant the tumor with triple negative breast cancer, and it wouldn't grow. It just wouldn't grow in the mouse, and the mouse just kept running around, just staying quite happy. So that demonstrates that the immune response is there. The body is starting to recognize the tumor, the cancer, and start fighting it. And we're actually continuing more of the characterization work around the immune response, because that will help us as we develop the protocols for the clinical trials. And that's something we're working quite closely with the Hudson Institute on. So that actually, as a monotherapy, gives us a lot of really interesting sort of potential that a lot of current therapies just don't really achieve.
Right.
Now, it's probably worth also spending a little bit of time on checkpoint earlier. Checkpoints. This is where it causes a little bit of probably misunderstanding or in the market. So checkpoint inhibitors are a type of immunotherapy. So by definition, it's basically triggering your immune response to start fighting, identifying and fighting cancers. And checkpoint inhibitors are actually quite established as one type of immunotherapy. And it's actually been quite, the challenge with checkpoint inhibitors is that they only work, sometimes 10, 20% of the time. So if they work, they can be very effective, but chances are they don't really work as well.
Okay.
And so what we did was we actually had we had a standalone checkpoint inhibitor model. We also had our treatment, but we didn't want to give the full-blown treatment. We wanted to give a limited administration, because if we had the full-blown treatment and we got the results we got that I mentioned previously, you wouldn't really be able to measure how much effective we could be. And what we found, and this was done by the Hudson, what we found was the effectiveness of the tumor size reduction was increased by more than 60% by combining our technology with checkpoint inhibitors. The question here that the market may have said is, well, who cares? You've got something that just regress the tumor. What's the point? So checkpoint inhibitors are a big cash cow for a number of the big pharma companies. For example,
and why is that?
Well, as an example, Keytruda is probably the best blockbuster drug for checkpoint inhibitors. It's owned by Merck.
Okay.
That technology has got, that accounts for about 30% of Merck's global sales every year.
Wow.
And their patent is running out in 6 years' time. So if you want the cash cow to continue, you can develop new IP by having combination therapies and extending the life cycle. And 30% is a pretty big wad of cash. So if you can extend that a few years, that's a lot of value. And so that is another avenue that is potentially open to us to explore collaboration with the pharmaceutical industry. And it just, from a commercial standpoint, we're trying to expand the paths to commercialization. It's not just a therapy, monotherapy, we're trying to get into the clinic. But if we can collaborate with partners, helps commercialize different elements, whether it's pharma companies, whether it's even trying to do combination therapies with surgeons, etc. It's certainly something we're quite open with, because we're trying to, find multiple options and directions to commercialize.
Great.
Yeah. Okay. I guess the path forward for us. So
yeah, now, the next 12 months, what's going on? That's what they're about. Yes.
All right. Well, as I mentioned, I think one of the big catalysts the market will look for is clinical trials.
Yes.
When are we starting them, and when do we find out if there's really good efficacy coming out of it? Now, before we can start those clinical trials, a number of things we need to do. One of them is additional proof of concept work, which will have two outcomes. First outcome is, we might find some more interesting aspects of our technology. The second outcome is, and I mentioned before, if we can actually get better analysis and characterization of the immune response, maybe find additional biomarkers that will integrate into our clinical trial protocols, it'll just potentially help us fine-tune our protocols to, again, make it more effective when we get to the clinic.
Right.
The other thing that we need to do before we get to the clinic is lots of stuff that the market doesn't care about, but it's essential to actually start to complete before you start. Typically, that includes GLP tox studies, toxicity and safety studies, as well as making sure that we're on a pathway to GMP manufactured product. You're sticking this into someone's bloodstream, so you want to make sure it's safe, it's the same stuff, and it's doesn't sort of deteriorate or change in any way as it's sort of running around your body. So those are sort of things that we do need to complete. But once we've completed that, we've got a number of different sort of indications that we can try. I've mentioned skin cancer, anogenital. There's a bunch of others. I mean, in our mouse models, we've done it on triple-negative breast cancer, T-cell lymphoma, pancreatic cancers, and we've found in all those cases that we found regression in those tumors. So in terms of human application, there's a lot of potential there. We're not looking at stopping at 2 or 3, but it's going to be a portfolio of different cancer types.
Okay, and also, just to be clear, these are not in human trials at this point. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yeah, they're what we call in vivo testing, which is in animals or in but in live beings. The human trials are the ones that we're looking to start over the coming year or so, and that's really going to be, I think, a next inflection point for the stock.
Okay.
Yeah. As I mentioned before, our primary focus initially will be in Australia because we've got such a great environment to do early stage trials here. On top of that, we're not paying the bill, so that really helps.
Right, for sure.
And, once we de-risk the situation, then we can start expanding into clinical trials outside Australia. And at that stage, we should be have much more confidence on our risk return profile.
Yeah, and I'd imagine that because your target markets are so large, recruiting patients shouldn't be as much of a challenge as a very rare disease. Is that correct?
Yeah, the rare disease has actually been quite a large focus for a lot of pharma companies, and part of the reason for that is there are often more accelerated paths to getting the drug approved. But obviously, if you've got a mainstream sort of indication,
right.
Large population, the market's much bigger. Population size in many of our markets, like Indonesia, India, China, I mean, there's no issue with population size. There'll be issues around whether you get reimbursement, whether you've got how much volume,
Sure.
other aspects which are less around efficacy. But obviously, if we get good results, it's in one country, it's it's quite transportable.
People are people, yes.
Yeah. Yeah. As I mentioned before, outside cancer, and cancer will be the first clinical trials. The atherosclerosis infectious disease is in the earlier stage of development. We're continuing to do some early stage work. And once we can hopefully target a couple of indications, we can move that forward towards the clinic. But that'll be further down the track.
Great. Well, sounds good, Thian. I mean, it's really, as you said, like there's you had efficacy or, promising results in 2021. This year is really, it sounds like so far is about setting up these, these clinical trials. And that's really what everyone's gonna be focusing on. At this point, everybody, I think that just in conscious of time, Thian, I think we should open up to Q&A if you're okay with that.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay. The first question, I'm just gonna read it to you verbatim. Is there a risk that when the trials get into the clinic for internal tumors and that the light doesn't work as effectively in humans because of the larger distance to the tumor versus mice?
Okay, that's a really good question.
Yeah.
There's parts of the answer. Firstly, in any clinical trial, you actually have no guarantee of any success.
Right.
Typically, with phase 1 clinical trials, the main focus is on safety. And then when you get to phase 2, it starts focusing on efficacy.
Right.
So there's a slight nuance there. Actually, that person had a good question because you do need light to actually activate this compound. So,
right.
Obviously skin cancers, anogenital cancers are typically on the surface. That's where light can penetrate. Now with internal organs, we can also put some sort of catheter or some sort of probe. Sometimes if we work with surgeons, they're already opening up the cavity and so exposing the tumor already. But if you think that, and a mouse is very different. You can shine a light and a mouse goes straight through the body.
Okay.
We're a little bit thicker than that. So we will be selecting indications where we can access light, whether it's for a probe, whether it's just because it's close to the surface of the skin, or whether it's something that can be, working together with a surgeon. There are actually a lot of different indications we can choose from, but getting light there will be an important aspect. Technically, the wavelength of light we have, which is around about the visible red spectrum, is actually a shorter wavelength than the previous photosensitizer. So our light actually penetrates deeper into the tissue than compared to earlier versions. That's a sort of aspect. Yeah.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you, Alan, for the question. Another question I'm getting: checkpoint inhibitors working with other therapies. Given that there could be so many different combinations, how do you trial those combinations?
Well, checkpoint inhibitors, we firstly wanted to figure out if we had synergistic or additive benefits, and the answer is yes. When you start getting into the clinic, that's when you start working with the clinicians and the researchers and essentially combine your heads together to figure out what is the right protocol, what are the right sort of indications to target. And that's a very, very, that's essentially a back and forth discussion.
Okay.
And as we also have to get both sides understand the mechanism of action, that will also help determine, your protocol and also the specific type of cancer you can target for that combination therapy.
Yeah, I think what the person is probably driving at is that there's so many different combinations you can make and so many different doses. How do you decide as you,
okay.
Yeah.
Well, combinations.
Not easy.
Yeah, I mean, certainly as part of the earlier stage clinical trials and even sometimes phase 2s, you can have dose range finding studies because you do want to figure out what that optimal dosage is. And that is typically structured into the trial itself. Now, in terms of the combination, what sort of checkpoint inhibitor versus, our photosensitizer? Well, for us, we already have the photosensitizer we're taking into the clinic. Then if we're going to work with the checkpoint inhibitor owner, they have their checkpoint inhibitor. We will just work with them to see how we can get a an optimal or a good, effective combination.
Understood. Okay, another question. The triple negative breast cancer, what are the next steps specifically with that cancer? Or are they part of this trial, really, I suppose?
Well, it was used as a model, not just because we'll say, hey, okay, let's take it into a triple negative breast cancer patient in a clinical trial, but really as a model to represent a number of different cancers. And so whilst it certainly is a possibility for us to go into trials with triple negative breast, it's not limiting us to being in that indication by itself. I guess what it does demonstrate, and it's a really good model for, is it's a chemo-resistant type of strain of cancer.
Okay.
And so to demonstrate efficacy was a really good signal. It also often metastasizes. Actually, in the mice, unfortunately, the cancer spread and metastasized in the lungs and other organs. Right. And what we found is that after treatment, the metastases actually went away. And that's also a nice signal, because obviously the big issue with cancer treatment is not just getting rid of the cancer, because you can do that through surgery or chemo or radiotherapy, but it's actually stopping the spread. Or stopping the recurrence, and that's the holy grail of cancer treatment. And at least in vivo, we've shown that our technology has some real promise there. So that the real test here is to convert that into clinical context.
Got it. Hey, Thian, I'm just conscious again of time. In closing, if there are a couple of things that people should really understand about Invion, what would be the message in your opinion?
Well, I guess there's a couple of messages. One is the technology, and our technology, we hope we can revolutionize or really change the game in cancer treatment. We're not going to solve all the type of cancers, but we think we can make a real difference here, and not just in regressing tumors, but actually really addressing the key challenge of spreading the tumor. The spread of the tumor, the metastases, et cetera, and the immune response. So that's number one. We have something that we think is really, really special. And we've already demonstrated it preclinical. We want to demonstrate it in a clinical context. Number two is our structure, which is essentially, well, we don't have to spend the big money on clinical trials till we have a lot of data to show that it works. Because our partner RMW is basically footing the high risk bills. And I guess number three is really the focus that we have is really aligned to kind of we have the cash to continue on for a decent period of time, and we're not going to be reacting to just trying to adapt to our changes in the market price, which is a nice situation.
Yeah, you're well funded. Yes. Yeah,
well funded. But we're very, very focused on risk-adjusted return. So if we're going to spend money, we want to make sure that there's a really we either have a lower risk or we have a very high payoff, and that's how we think about it, and that's what we're going to be looking at for the next couple of years.
Right. Well, that ties back into your Goldman days, so I'm sure. Okay, hey, Thian, thank you so much, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I know Thian well, and I'm sure if anyone has any follow-up questions, just let me know, and we'll relay them over, and we'll get them answered for you.
Fantastic. Thanks, Rick.
Thanks a lot, everybody. Bye-bye. Thomas, I'll turn it over to you to talk a little bit about legacy. Thanks for watching another episode of 180 Markets Off the Charts. If you want access to thousands of capital raises, sign up at 180markets.com.au and you'll get access to our very next capital raise. Thanks for watching.